Do you find yourself constantly battling self-doubt and perfectionism? I've been a therapist for 6 years and I specialize working with individuals who struggle with anxiety and perfectionism. I'm actually going to dive into what triggers perfectionism, the 3 types of perfectionism, as well as the evidence-based skills based on each type of perfectionist. I'm going to give you a focus area on what you would need to do in order to help improve this. And then at the end, I'm also going to give you subscriber examples. These are people who want feedback because they struggle with perfectionism, and I'm going to give them some tips and some feedback. Let's go ahead and get started on the common triggers for perfectionism. Number 1 that I always see, and this is probably something you struggle with a lot too, is the fear of failure. And this could look like just dreading to make a mistake. And basically, most people who have this trigger, they associate fear of judgment or rejection. And so that could be such a powerful trigger. Perfectionists often equate failure as a personal lack of self-worth. Most perfectionists who struggle with failure feel like failure can feel permanent, so they don't like making mistakes. Another trigger is high personal standards. People who set excessive high standards for themselves are also prone to perfectionism. Honestly, this often stems from an internal desire to excel in aspects of life, whether it's work, relationship, or personal projects. And honestly, sometimes it's self-imposed, sometimes it's from our family. So we just set high standards, and that can trigger a lot of our perfectionism. And that's where the third trigger is parental expectations and upbringing. So childhood experience, such as growing up with parents who placed a high value on achievement or who are overly critical, or also parents who don't give any standards. I think the same thing can happen when we just don't have a form of what is the standard for achievement and things like that. And so sometimes with that, the person can internalize it and feel like, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect because they don't know what enough is, right? Then it's cultural and societal pressures. Often I see this, it's often perpetuated in the media to have these perfect morning routines, this perfect life, this perfect body, and all of this can fuel and trigger our perfection. It's almost like when we see these perfectly curated lives that people show on the internet, it is hard for us to kind of internalize that. Am I doing something wrong in my life that I can't be that person? And remember, this is highly edited videos. It's not real life, and nobody's life is perfect. A lot of that triggers comes from societal pressure, whether we're looking on TikTok and we see our For You pages constantly just these perfect morning routines, these perfect people who have this perfect life. And yes, it's going to trigger our perfectionism. Comparison with others. So the tendency to constantly compare oneself to others, especially with social media, we tend to compare ourselves with others, which can definitely trigger perfectionism because we're trying to live up to that person's standard. Maybe we live different lives with different resources and just different demands. And so sometimes it just isn't always realistic, but that can definitely trigger someone to have perfectionist tendencies. Another one is academic and professional environments. Whenever I worked somewhere that was highly competitive and highly numbers driven, it drew me to perfectionism or even amplified my current existing perfectionism. So if you work in sales or if you work in just a highly perfectionist environment, I know my husband used to do architecture. And so that was a very highly structured and highly perfectionist environment. And so it really drew people to be really perfect about their designs. And so think about your industry, and does your work environment drive you to be perfect? Does it have impossible standards for you to reach? And then past successes. I think our past successes can also trigger perfectionism. If we have been praised or rewarded for doing achievements, our brain registers that. Our brain is oh yeah, for every time we're praised because we're a good student or because we're a good daughter or a good son or whatever, because we did something good, quote unquote, based on the other person's expectations, then that tells us okay, this is the metric of success. And so we need to continue to do that. If not, it's not going to be enough. If not, we're not going to be liked, right? And that's where people pleasing comes, which can also be another trigger for perfectionism. And then cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are actually thinking errors. There are thought patterns that our brain creates. And this could look like all or nothing mentality. So thinking of things in black and white. Example is, if I don't have time to do my 45-minute workout work and I'm not going to do it at all. If I don't have a healthy meal during lunch, then I'm just going to break the whole diet and I'm just going to, eat whatever it is that I want. So it's all or nothing mentality, overgeneralization. So when we think because one thing happened once, that means it's always going to happen like this. And then catastrophizing thinking, which is basically thinking the worst case scenario. These are all contributors to perfectionist behavior. These are very much, a lot of these are just like very black and white thinking. I work with my clients when it comes to cognitive distortions to reframe those thoughts. Those are all the triggers. Let me know in the comments if you resonate with any of these. Now that we've talked about triggers, I want to talk about the 3 types of perfectionist or the 3 types of perfectionism that you may be noticing in your life. This is going to help. This is going to help if you label it. It's going to help you understand and figure out what focus area you need to really dive into. And so the very first one is the self-oriented perfectionist. And basically, this is the type of person who sets unrealistic, high standards upon themselves. These are people that are driven by an internal desire to be a perfectionist. They are often their harshest critics. They probably have a very loud inner self-critic, always saying, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. These are the people who honestly have the hardest time when they don't meet their expectations and whether they fail or don't do the things perfectly. These are probably the people that never finish a project because they're procrastinating, because they want things to be perfect. They never post the thing. And so sometimes it could look very differently, but the whole point of this is that it's internally self-imposed. If you are the self-oriented perfectionist, then this is the focus area I would want you to do. Because you have a very high self-critic, a very loud inner self-critic, you want to focus on self-compassion. And this could look like aiming to do one nice thing a day for yourself, one kind thing, because your brain is probably really loud with negative thoughts about yourself. And so it's going to be ideal for you to just start practicing cultivating self-compassion. That could be reading books about self-compassion. You could actually make a list of just like kind things that you could do for yourself. I love having like a bank of things that I could do, because if I'm stressed out and I don't remember okay, what is the one kind thing I'm going to do for myself, at least I have a bank of options and activities that I can do to be nice to myself. And that could even work. Being nice to yourself is also allowing yourself to reframe those negative thoughts. And maybe I'll do a whole video on like cognitive reframing if that's something that you want me to do. But yeah, it's just like practicing the art of being kind to yourself. You're going to have to start. It's a skill, right? So we're going to practice it and you're not going to be perfect at it. You're actually going to fail at this as well. The other thing that you need to focus on is setting realistic personal goals. I actually have a whole video on how to set SMART goals, like realistic goals that make sense, because these self-imposed perfectionists really are the ones that are the overachievers, and they have a hard time with actually setting realistic goals. I saw someone have 24 goals for 2024, and I automatically thought, whoa, that's like so difficult. And I'm not saying this person can't accomplish that, but I'm saying is it realistic? Are we going to actually feel good about ourselves if we have 24 goals for the year of 2024? So I would much rather you have 3 goals that you're going to focus on that are small, obtainable, and reachable. So making sure that you are setting those realistic goals so that you don't burn out as well, because people who are self-imposed are usually the ones that deal with burnout more. And then something else you could do is just practicing acknowledging your achievements. This is something that I would do on my monthly reset routine. So I would actually write down what are my wins for this month, especially because it doesn't come natural to me. For me, I would accomplish something, and you probably guessed, yes, I am a self-imposed perfectionist. I would accomplish something, and then I would just kind of oh, okay. That's expected of me. I don't need to celebrate this. No, finding a moment to acknowledge your wins is so important. So whether that is you set it up every week to acknowledge it, you write it on a note in your notes app, but you just want to start practicing and cultivating the art of celebrating your wins or acknowledging your wins. If you don't want to celebrate them, that's fine. But if you want to acknowledge them, even just having a quick moment of just saying, oh, these are all the things that I accomplished, I'm really grateful for them. That is going to be significant for you to learn to accept and embrace the things that you do strive and achieve versus just focusing on the failures. And then most perfectionists, this is not only for the self-imposed, but this is for everybody. Most perfectionists will say things in absolute languages like I never, I always, I shouldn't, right? So very absolute, like there's no going back from that statement. And I think it would be very helpful. Instead of saying I should, you can say things like I prefer, because at the end of the day, it is a preference. You self-imposed whatever you needed to do that day. It's not something that you should do, it's something that you prefer to do, something that you would feel better to accomplish if you wanted to, because again, that should was created inside your head. It was created inside your head. Nobody told you. And the great measure that I would say is ask yourself, who told you this? Because most of the times it's like you told yourself this and you put that high expectation. I also recommend some resources for you if you're a self-imposed perfectionist, and that is to read Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff or The Gift of Imperfection by Brene Brown. Really love those books. And then I think this is very important to have a journal that would fit really well with you. I like the Peacefully Productive Journal by Hustle Sanely. It has really helped me in my pursuit of learning to embrace imperfection and accept the things that I can. And I think it could be a very helpful tool for you. But you don't need a specific journal. You can just journal in anything that you want. I also recommend a gratitude journal for you. Now, the second type of perfectionist, this is the other-oriented perfectionism. This form of perfectionism is actually directed towards others. So people with other-oriented perfectionism have high expectations at the people around them, whether it's family, friends, or colleagues. You have an expectation for them. You have high expectations for them. They may be overly critical or judgmental about others' performance or behaviors. You may often find yourself like feeling very disappointed by the people around you because they do not meet your standards. And to a degree, I think there's a reason when we're like, okay, these people are not showing up in my life the way I want to, and these are realistic standards, or no, truly these are unrealistic standards. I'll give you an example, and I don't know if it's a really good one. I learned how to do the KonMari method, which is like a folding method for your clothes, and I wanted my husband to do that, and I'm like, I imposed that belief to think like, no, I need you to do that, I need you to do that perfectly. And I remember him saying to me, well, I'm going to actually need to practice this to learn it. I'm okay with knowing that this is like the way you want your stuff, like you want your stuff to be folded, but I'm going to need some time to practice. So I did allow him to practice and he learned, but I gave people grace. And beforehand, I would just like impose this expectation and either not communicate it. And so I would always have people failing me because I would never communicate my needs. And so the other oriented perfectionist is usually someone who doesn't communicate their needs as much, and they have a hard time like not feeling disappointed with people. Probably the hardest time to also ask for help, and the hardest time to not have be super rigid in their routines and their schedule and how they like things to be done. And because of that, it's hard for people to be there for them. And so, yeah, if this is you, girly, then this is the focus area that I want you to do. And that is, if you find yourself leaning towards this particular perfectionism, it is key to start practicing cultivating empathy and patience towards others. I know I have a hard time being patient with others. I used to just get so agitated. The biggest thing is understanding that everyone has different strengths, different weaknesses, and accepting that others might have a different form of standards, approaches. It can help you build better relationships. It can help you reduce potential conflicts arising from these unrealistic expectations. These are people who definitely may benefit from just sitting with their partner, friends, and really just having an honest conversation about their relationships and how they're showing up for these relationships is going to be very important. People who are other-oriented perfectionists need to focus on actively giving people compliments. And I think that could be, again, you can choose once a day just to give a compliment to someone you love or a stranger. And this is, again, just cultivating empathy and acceptance of others, seeing the goodness of where others are. Appreciation is so important. Sometimes my husband will do things that I never even thought I needed to be done. And even though it's not the thing that maybe I wanted to be done or my priority, I'm always grateful and appreciative. And I always say that I'm appreciative. Even the small things where I think in this culture, we think like, oh, that's expected. If he wanted to, he would. I really think that even if that is the case, like if he wanted to, he would, and things like that, like I still think that we need to appreciate each other, even in the smallest things. And so for other oriented perfectionists practicing appreciation, like I really appreciate you for doing that. And I get it, even if it's the bare minimum, I still think appreciation is needed. Something else is like managing your own emotions, especially if people can't do things, the laundry the way you like it, cleaning the way you like it, things like that. Think about, like, again, an example of this that I had with the client is like they would host dinner parties, but then they hated that they were the only person that hosted these parties and no one ever helped, but they never asked for help. And so I think with that situation, like, you can ask for help, even if they don't do it the way you do it. You can always say, hey, this is how I do it. You might be surprised that sometimes they may have a better approach to doing things. So just being open-minded, learning to communicate your feelings in a healthy way. If you are someone who is struggling with this in your relationship, or you're imposing a lot of expectations to people, this would be good for like marriage counseling. I think it's so important to continue to work on our communication with our partners, our friends. And so that is one of the things, focus area, that you would need to work on. And then lastly, it is the socially prescribed perfectionist or perfectionism. And this is the tribe driven by perception that society or significant others have unrealistic expectations for you. So this is basically other people have high expectations of you. You think other people have high expectations of you. And so then you always feel like it's never enough. People who are socially prescribed feel that they need the validation of others in order to be accepted. So they're constantly striving to be liked. Most of my people pleasers are probably in this area. They often feel pressure to conform to social norms, and that's a fear of judgment or rejection. Again, if they feel it's kind of similar to the self-imposed. But your focus area would be, it's important to work on building your self-esteem, your assertiveness, so that you can lower the people pleaser mentality. It is okay to say what you want, say what you need. Recognize that it's often impossible to meet other people's expectations. I think you're going to find yourself a really hard time just being able to meet everyone's expectations. There's always going to be someone who doesn't like what you're doing, wouldn't do it like that. And so it's important that we learn to cultivate assertiveness, and most importantly, self-validation. So I want you to focus this. If I had a client who was specifically working on this, I would focus on understanding more about their value system, their belief system, really understand what do they want, what is important to them, so that could be their guide in order to help them be like, okay, this is what I value. I don't need the validation from other people. This is what I value. This is what I'm going to do because this is my value. Rather than seeking out external validation, this can provide a stable foundation for your self-worth. So those are my tips for as far as your focus area. Let's talk about real life examples from subscribers who submitted their story. And I'm going to give you guys some feedback and things that I think you need to work on. As always, I am a therapist, but I'm not your therapist. So I'm going to keep these suggestions broad so that anyone who may resonate with this can get some feedback. But I always recommend that you seek help from your own licensed therapist. That way it can be a little bit more tailored towards you and your situation, right? Because they're going to give the time to get to know you and to really understand your story and what really you need in order to overcome perfectionism. So this is the subscriber's scenario. This person said, because of perfectionism, things tend to be all or nothing. I would love to be comfortable with good enough. If I don't have time to do it right and do it all, it stacks up. Then it becomes bigger, and that leads to procrastination. If I feel I don't have enough time to totally complete things, and it builds up some more, creating more anxiety. Ooh, girl, your number one thing that you're going to have to work on is action, right? Messy action, but also with a structure. So this is what I would have you do. This is number one, it would be breaking tasks into manageable steps. Instead of viewing tasks as a whole, you want to break them down into small, more manageable steps. This approach makes it more easy, less overwhelming, and it helps you view partial completion as progress rather than failure. And then you're also going to want to focus on time management and prioritization. So utilize time management examples like the Pomodoro method would be a good one. For example, you can also allocate like specific time slots for tasks and prioritize them based on urgency and importance. This can help in dealing with the feeling of needing to do everything all at once, even like focusing on just one thing a day. If you haven't read the book, The One Thing, you need to. It is going to be really helpful, but the whole gist of it is just doing one thing a day, meaning focus. And that doesn't mean doing just that one thing, but like focusing on the one thing that's going to make tomorrow better. I think that's going to help you a lot with learning how to prioritize things. And, or if you want to take that extra step, focus 3, right? So creating 3 focus items that you want to do for that day and not moving on to more tasks until you have those 3 done. But I want you to give yourself a period to just learn, are these 3 realistic? Because sometimes we'll do things like build a website. That has so many steps. And so first doing a couple of steps. Oh, there is a resource that I recently learned. It's called Goblin Tools, and you can download it. It is free. I believe so. It's free. You can download it into your phone, and you can actually put the task that you want and say break it down for me, and it will break it down for you, give you an example if you have a hard time breaking down things. So I recommend that. You have to practice good enough. Consciously practicing accepting that good enough is often sufficient. Start with less important tasks where the stakes are lower, and then reflect on the outcomes of these tasks to reinforce the idea that not everything requires perfectionism. Something else that I would do is a cognitive behavioral technique, which is challenging your perfectionist thoughts that lead to procrastination. So when you notice thoughts like, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all, counter that with more rational thoughts like, it's better to do something imperfectly than to do nothing at all. If I don't do something, I'm going to be even more behind. I'm going to be even more burned out. So it's best that I do one thing right now than the 5 things that I want to get done. I also like the 5-minute rule. The 5-minute rule is just to set a timer for 5 minutes, have a task that you want to get done, and then just focus on doing it for 5 minutes. It just creates momentum, especially if you're having a hard time figuring out like to even start. Then this is a really good one that I recommend. Then seek feedback and reflect. Like sometimes getting feedback from people you trust or the people that you work, if it's like for your work environment, on the quality of the things that you do. Sometimes we don't think that we're doing it shitty, but someone else, is actually like, whoa, that's amazing. And so I think it's important to ask for feedback and accept feedback, accept the things that people tell you. If people say you're doing your best, like you're doing a great job, accept it. Because I think we also have a hard time. I used to be someone like this where I would, if someone say, oh, you did so good, you're such a good speaker or whatever, I would say no, or like, no, it's because I'm already at this level. They probably are measuring based on like someone that isn't like on a high level as me. And so that means that it's still not enough, right? So I would always do that and not accept compliments and not accept the reality that other people share and really base it on my reality, which was irrational, because as a perfectionist, you will have irrational realities about what you think is good and good enough. So asking for loved ones' feedback, work colleagues, things like that will be very helpful. So that is what I would do for someone who is having a hard time with these all or nothing perfection. Now, the second person, their scenario is this. I grew up in a very cluttered home, so I struggle with perfectionism when it comes to my living space now. I get anxious about things when someone is going to come over, and I always question what someone will think if they think my space is messy or not cute. I wish I could let these thoughts go and relax, but they reappear every time someone's coming to visit. I'm not sure what to do about it. I spend so much time getting worked up and tidying. Ooh, I love this one because I I had a hard time doing that too. This is actually comes with challenging those cognitive distortions, those thinking errors that I talked about. So this describer's anxiety seems to stem from worrying about other people's opinions. It's important to challenge these thoughts. So you want to ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if someone thinks my space isn't perfect? I feel down for a little bit. Probably. Often the outcome isn't as dire as our anxiety suggests. And honestly, ask yourself, if I do feel bad because this person maybe made like a weird look or whatever. One, you also have to ask yourself, do I even care about this person? Like, who are the people that I actually care about their opinions? And another one is to basically say, okay, like, let's just say this makes me feel shitty that someone made a judgmental comment about my space. Or I'm worried that someone's going to make a comment about my space or said it behind my back. In a week, how will you feel? In a month, how will you feel? In a year, how would you feel about this? Usually, there's going to be something else worrying you, and it's not going to be important. So practicing decatastrophizing. So you find out what the worst case scenario would be, and then how would you cope with it if the worst case scenario did happen. Maybe it's more of a reflection of like the individual that you're feeling judged for. Again, I don't know the context of your life, but yeah, sometimes they can come from people having like overly critical parents, overly critical people, having things wanting to be perfect. And so it's important to learn how to challenge these cognitive distortions. Then set realistic standards. Determine what's realistically clean and organized for your living space. Personally, I would find myself deep cleaning before people would come to my space, and then only to clean after again. And I was so burnt out because I'm like, whoa, I just did all this deep clean and now I have to clean again because a space, one of the things that I learned is that our spaces are meant to be lived in. They're meant to be enjoyed. And when we just feel like it constantly has to be clean and tidy, I think for you, it's also important to create systems to make it a lot easier for you to clean. So it doesn't feel like you're constantly finding like so exhausted. And then also, again, with like the same kind of feedback from the other one is to get feedback from other people. Like actually genuinely ask people, do you think this is messy? Like, do you really think this is messy? Like, or how would you, like, is there something that you don't like about my space? Or, if you really want to know, like, honestly, get the real thoughts. Most of the time people won't tell you the realness, but here's the thing. Some people will. If you have a mother-in-law or your mom, they might tell you the real deal about how they feel about your space. And sometimes, like, that could be helpful feedback. Sometimes it cannot be constructive feedback. Like if you genuinely want to know because you're holding yourself to a high expectation that I don't know if it's real, right? So maybe you need to find out. You have to practice mindfulness. It can help you manage the anxiety that comes with these thoughts, like accepting your thoughts without judgment, committing to action aligned with your values. Like if you enjoy time with visitors, then cleaning your home has nothing to do with enjoying time with visitors, because the thoughts of cleaning your home or deep cleaning your home all the time and feeling like other people are going to judge you doesn't correlate with the value of enjoying time with people and being like calm and just having fun, all these things. So if it doesn't align with your value, it might not be so important. And I think gradual exposure is something else that you can start doing, which start by inviting a close friend or a family member over, someone you feel comfortable with when your house isn't 100% clean or tidy, just so that you see how you feel. Sometimes you kind of have to feel uncomfortable, and learning how to feel uncomfortable in those scenarios. So try having someone over when there's dishes in the sink or when you didn't like clean the living room. Just like try and see how uncomfortable you are after they leave. Sit with that emotion. I want you to learn how to just sit with that like difficult emotion. And the reason why I say this is because gradually, as we start gradually increasing the frequency of you not completely, deep cleaning, maybe we're tidying, but we're not deep cleaning, you will desensitize yourself to the anxiety. It will happen, but you have to start practicing this gradual exposure to people seeing not 100% perfect home, right? And remember, their definition of perfect is very different than your definition of perfect. So I hope this was helpful, you guys. I definitely think that working with a therapist can really help, because sometimes there's more to it than what I'm just saying, and it might be unique towards your situation. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what perfectionism, type of perfectionism you resonated the most. And also, you may resonate it with all three, and that's totally okay. There's sometimes a combination of all those three. But if you enjoyed this video and you find it helpful, make sure that you consider subscribing to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, and I'll see you in my next video.